So much drama in the NYC, it's kinda hard just to be the Richard one me, but I somehow and some way keep thinking on philosophical shit like every single day. Can I kick a little something to the scientists and make a few arguments? Okay, I'm out here trying something new. You know, I've been trying to record a series of videos to accompany my blog post that I have on Philosophy Sucks. I've done one of them at this point. I did Are We Living in a Westworld World, which I've had up there, and I've been meaning to get other ones when I had the chance. And so now I think I'm starting to have some time here to work on this stuff. So I wanted to visit one of my posts. Really, it was brought on to me by participating in a NEH-funded seminar at LaGuardia Community College that I was the co-project director of. This was a project on techno-humanism and transhumanism, and it was part of a larger project that I wasn't running, but this is the segment that I was involved in. And it brought together faculty members from LaGuardia Community College from all across the college, from all different departments, not just my department, humanities philosophy area, but all across the college. And we spent a year reading various authors, various works, some notable ones, some people that are familiar from the literature on transhumanism and so forth. And I found that this was a very exciting seminar for myself personally. You know, I've always kind of associated loosely in my own thinking transhumanist ideas with ideas that I hold. So, you know, I'm not a member of the Transhumanist Association. I don't really publish or work in this area, to be honest with you. But I have a commitment, a belief that I think is in line with the transhumanist movement, and so I do consider myself a transhumanist of a sort. So I consider transhumanism to be an extension of humanism, where humanism is roughly the idea embodied in the Enlightenment that reason is our greatest asset as a species, and that we should encourage and promote the use of reason. And I don't just mean intelligence here. This is something that was brought out very, I think, clearly in the seminar that we had. So on the one hand, intelligence can be thought of as simply problem solving. You give something a problem, and if it can solve it, it's intelligent to that degree. And problem solving and goals seem to be orthogonal to each other, so that you can imagine any level of intelligence at all associated with any kind of goal. So this is sort of similar to Nick Bostrom's idea that you could have a super intelligent computer whose goal was simply to produce paper clips, and that this could produce some kind of unforeseen disaster for the human species. So this idea that you could have a super intelligent machine with goals that were so trivial is correct, I think. But notice that this doesn't entail that rationality and any goal whatsoever can be associated with each other. And so what I tend to think is that rationality and intelligence are distinct from each other, and that rationality involves something over and above intelligence, and that if you build a truly rational agent, then morality and things that we think about as important values and other stuff kind of fall out of that automatically. To some extent, I don't view human beings as fully rational creatures, and this is where I would disagree with Enlightenment thinkers like Kant and other people. And this is something that I think the transhumanist movement and associations can add to humanism in general, so that humanists like Kant said that we needed to have sapere aude, the courage to be rational, the courage to use the reason which we were given. And for Kant, the only thing that was missing, we had the reason, but what was missing was the willpower to use it, to free ourselves from, as Kant put it, this self-imposed tutelage, where we don't transcend boundaries set on ourselves by our own self. So I don't know if I agree with that. I think that we are semi-rational creatures. I think we're in transition. And that we could add or augment human rationality to become more perfectly rational, to become more fully rational. And I tend to think that this is the idea, this is the part of the transhumanist idea that is exciting to me, that we don't want to just build better gadgets to augment the mind, but we want to produce a more rational being, one that can maybe embody the ideas of the Enlightenment, while recognizing that we are not yet such beings. The ideals of the Enlightenment are not embodied in us, merely waiting for us to use them, but there's something that we have to construct, things towards which we have to aim, and the level at which we are competing now rationality-wise, isn't where we ought to be. So that's my sort of take on the transhumanist agenda. What does that have to do with existentialism? Well, interestingly, during the course of this seminar, I really realized that I had these latent existentialist ideas that I wasn't fully aware that I had. And to be 100% honest, I mean, I studied existentialism as an undergraduate in college. I studied Sartre extensively. I had a couple classes on Sartre, a class on postmodernism, studied Nietzsche, Derrida, these kinds of things as an undergraduate. And I'd always been interested in philosophy. And as a philosophy major, I'd always found the philosophers we discussed extraordinary interesting, just super interesting. But when I read Sartre and the other existentialists, I finally had discovered not just something that was interesting, but something that seemed to make sense to me from my point of view, the life that I had actually been living. These ideas seemed to make a difference. And in particular, Sartre's ideas about responsibility and freedom, that really struck me at the time as important. But as I got older, what's really stuck with me, it turns out, is the existentialist notion of what a person is. So in the debate about transhumanism, sometimes people object, well, are we going to be human still? Will we be transforming ourselves into something that is no longer all the way human? And is this something we really want to embark on? Of course, that really depends on what you think a human being is. And I think existentialism has something to offer here. So the key idea of existentialism, as I understand it, remember, I'm not an existentialist philosopher. I'm maybe a person who subscribes to this kind of worldview, but I don't work in this area, and I have only a kind of novice or beginner's understanding of it. But from what I understand, the essential idea of existentialism can be summed up in Sartre's idea that existence precedes essence. And so that if we wanted to say what is it that makes a person, it's not something that you're born with. There's no essential quality which persons have and non-persons lack at birth. What we think of as a person, according to Sartre, is a kind of nothingness, a kind of aiming at something which isn't yet existent. So this is what the way he interpreted the notion of intentionality. Intentionality is this fancy term from philosophy. It means being directed at or being about something, being aimed towards something. And for Sartre, this idea that there was a nothingness lying coiled at the center of existence was for him pretty profound. But the nothingness was just the absence of an existing thing. So if I want to become a doctor, for example, well then my being a doctor at this moment is a nothing. It's not something that I am, it's something that I want to be, it's something that I'm aiming at, and which you would need to understand in order to interpret my actions at the moment. So if I'm studying or if I'm not going out with my friends, you may say, what's his problem? He's studying for a college because he's wanting to be a doctor. So this project that I have, this aiming towards the future of becoming something that I am not, which is important in Sartre's terminology, the becoming of what one is not, is essentially tied up to what it means to be a person. So a person is not a formed thing, but an aiming towards something. And of course, if one takes this kind of view about what it means to be a person, then transhumanism and existentialism can be seen as naturally augmenting each other. So according to the transhumanists, we ought to be aiming, at least the transhumanists as I understand them, we ought to be aiming towards this more fully rational, not quite human as we know it now creature, something that transcends the limits that humanity currently is yoked under. A lot of it having to do with the evolutionary history, I would argue, of life on Earth, not having to do with pure rationality or rational beings as such. So transhumanism then claims that we should be aiming towards this certain idea. And existentialism claims that what a person is essentially is tied up with the kind of project that they aim towards or that they want to become. And I see these two ideas as naturally dovetailing with each other, so that an existential transhumanism
as I see it, claims that what a person is this project, and what we ought to be aiming for is the fully human project of realizing the kind of goals which as a collective species seems to be important to us. And these in particular seem to be a kind of universal benevolence, a transcendental justice, a turning of the other cheek, a kind of benign benevolence towards all living things,